everyone. Thank you for joining us here today, and I'm really excited to be with such a great panel of people. Before we get started, I just want to take a poll here. Who's been involved in any sort of digital transformation project? Raise your hand. Has it been a hard task? Yes? I think we can all agree that it's no easy feat, and it's something that has to be done to be competitive in the market space. So I commend all three of the panelists here today for talking about their journey. So with that said, I'm going to leave it up to you guys to just introduce yourselves, talk about kind of what you do within the organizations and sort of what team you sit on. So I'll start with you first, Peter.
So I'm Peter Warneke. I'm the Director of Business Intelligence for ALM Media. We're a publishing company with about 30 to 40 brands or so. We do events, media, and intelligence products. And my team, tiny team, services the whole organization in terms of their analytics and whatnot.
Wonderful.
Doug Del Vecchio. I head up the digital business intelligence for Humana, healthcare industry. I've been with Humana for about 4 years now. I am a hub and spoke to a hub and spoke, so I've got that going for me, which is nice. And we've been in about 7 to 8 months into our implementation with Tealium.
Awesome.
My name's Eric Guy. I lead analytics, research, and insights, so digital analytics and customer listening net promoter score for Robert Half, a staffing and consulting services company. And I'm in the marketing org, so I report to the CMO. And we're a year plus into our Tealium relationship so far.
Great. So it's interesting, you guys are in different parts of the organization. So when you went down this path with Tealium to really help eliminate some of the data silos and help to expand the accessibility of data across the organization, what were some of the other teams that you actually involved in the process of decision making? And Eric, I'll start first with you.
Fewer than I would have liked. Right at the time that we were cutting our Tealium deal, the organization went all in on another major software platform that powers our CRM and made a massive commitment to stand up a bunch of new systems and develop apps. And the net upshot was, hey, marketing, go cut that deal if you want, but you are responsible for your own deployment and implementation. Have a nice day. What's been interesting, though, through time, is we've been able to show value and get people excited about what Tealium can do, inclusive of being able to say where Tealium fits into the ecosystem for some of the customer digital transformation work that was committed to with other platforms.
I would say for me it was a little different, actually. I had an executive partner that ended up leaving the organization after about 6 or 7 months into it all. I then went back to my leadership team and said, hey, listen, this is a game changer, guys. We got to do something different about this. We have to fund this. Originally, we were going to partner with that executive partner to fund Tealium. At that stage then, we decided to move forward. They supported it, and it's been a grassroots campaign for us ever since. But I would say I would agree with Eric. You have to bring in as many partners as you can in this whole process.
Yeah, and I think we were a little more unique in that we've been a partner with Tealium for years, and our predecessors, kind of didn't have as much of a governance system in place. And so when my team came in, we were reevaluating the whole platform, and we got buy-in with our marketing and our president of media to be our champions to run with the software and see the functionality and run with it.
Right. So, I mean, it's such a big vision that we're going out and talking about with different customers, and everybody wants to get to this end place. But how do you go from getting vision alignment to making it a little bit more tangible for the organization, to make it something that's not necessarily a vision, but something that has a clear path forward?
So I think a big part of that is really a crawl, walk, run. And my vision is really to start off really small, incremental, and build on that. A lot of folks that I talk with in the organization, I'm going to say honestly, don't get it. They don't understand what it is we're trying to do. They don't understand the visitor stitching. They're like, it sounds interesting, and I think I get it, but a lot of it's really smoke and mirrors, it feels like to them. Ultimately, though, what I feel is that it's really important is tying into their goals. So what is it that they're trying to do? And then making that a piece, a part of what you're going to key in as your use cases to make the vision happen.
And just to echo off that comment you made, what are some of the reasons you feel that people don't get it? Is it because it is a new concept, or it's because they have a hard time just figuring out how to start facilitating the conversations amongst different teams that are starting to come together?
They really need to see it. So being from BI, a lot of times when you sit down with somebody and you say, what do you want? And you got this whiteboard, right? A lot of times they say, I think, I know, I want. And then before you know it, you start drawing and they're, oh, no, I don't want that. Well, that's kind of the same thing with Tealium, I feel like. The more that you can create and provide information to them, so the Universal Data Hub, hitting that, starting to bring back forth some data to say, hey, look, this is AudienceDB. This is some of the segments that you can create, first-party segmentation, new data layers. You've never seen that before. And that, I think, is a really big part of how you get the ball rolling with some of these folks.
Yeah.
So for us, the core value proposition in bringing Tealium on board was linking it to being able to fire some of our agencies and take our performance marketing in-house. Let's be blunt, right? We're like, hey, we think we can do a better job if we invest in building this capability. And if we do that, we need stronger analytics tools. And the argument for AudienceStream was, and all we have to do is make some incremental optimization in those programs based on AudienceStream, and it more than pays for itself. The one thing I would share is that we started off with a really linear plan. Hey, we're going to tag all of our global sites, then we're going to stand up new data layers, then we're going to deploy AudienceStream and start building out use cases. And we found out that that was leaving people behind, because no one was excited outside of my team. No one was excited with, hey, we're going to replace GTM with IQ. But what people got excited about once we pivoted was, why don't we stand everything up on our largest web property, .com, and let's actually start building out use cases that are allowing us to do efficient retargeting or efficient audience building to reach new audiences, right? And once we were able to show some tangible wins, people got more excited and got on board, right? So we're continuing that with a series of discussions around how can we continue to optimize for performance, and how can we leverage AudienceStream in particular to be giving customized and personalized experiences to people who are up funnel, who are not self-identified, who aren't logging in as customers.
I mean, when you talk about making that big decision to let go of your agency, that's a huge risk, right? Some people are just not willing to, whether it's adopt a new technology or make a big change like that, some people are very risk or change averse. So how do you work through that process with them?
We're really fortunate in that from the C-suite on down, we have a real mandate to optimize around business process and around technology, right? Like many of you in the room, we don't want to wake up and find ourselves Blockbuster. So being able to articulate, here are the benefits of doing this ourselves, and here's how Tealium is enabling technology and optimizing technology for us in that, really helped, right? Because again, had we led with the benefits of the CDP, I don't think people were going to get it, right? But instead, being able to lead tangibly with, here's an ROI-driven argument for why we should use this tool. And oh, by the way, once we get it in-house, then we're going to do a lot of cool stuff with it.
Yeah.
That allowed us to be able to pull that off.
I think, additionally, though, what Eric is describing is you're getting sponsorship from an executive to say, go and take that risk. And that, in some ways, creates accountability.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to be accountable for something and make change like that, to me, that's really important to get that executive sponsorship. It's huge.
So one of the things that I hear very often is use cases, right? So we had this big vision of what Tealium can do for organizations, but to help make it more tangible, people need to start with use cases. So when we talk about transformational technologies, do you feel like sometimes people hear use cases and it diminishes the potential value that Tealium could bring to an organization?
I think it doesn't diminish it, right? We all know what the technology can do, and we know the complexities and like all the different moving parts to get there.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's taking those baby steps to get to that final vision of what we want to do with the platform. And so I think for us, we're at the stage where we want to start proving out that the really basic stuff, like just getting someone to come back to the site, let's start there, measure it, and prove it out, and then we can get closer to that whole reason why we're using the platform.
And how did you start to prioritize some of those use cases that you used as sort of a foundational test to roll out an adoption plan of Tealium?
Yeah, I'd say the easiest one to measure.
Yeah, okay.
Start there, yeah.
And for us, it was where are we spending money? And therefore, where can we show incremental improvements that have a direct ROI link? Hey, we wouldn't have acquired these candidates or these clients had we not built this use case out.
Mine was changing perception. So a lot of the ways that I think about it is we have folks that log into our website, and so people always say, well, folks never come back to the unsecure side if they're members, and so it's changing that perception. So we've created a segment that just says known member. And so when they come back, you could say, hey, look at this. Because a lot of our VOC information was telling us that, yeah, I'm a member, but a lot of people within the organization were saying, members don't come back to the prospecting pages. That doesn't happen. And so now we're able to start looking at that information.
When you were looking at just doing the analysis piece of it, did you first focus on just identifying certain parts of a customer journey that you never really could identify before, and instead focus more on the identification and the enrichment of that visitor and less on the actual activation piece of it? Or, I mean, has it been led more by the activation and less around like the new audience identification?
I would say for me, it's more of the new audience identification. So the fact that we can create first-party segmentation, and the other thing that I've actually started talking to the team about is creating profiling within the process of prospecting or even other areas. So, or giving a digital score, your overall digital score. So if you're going on multiple domains, we would give you a digital score for X. This is all hypothesis too, and I've been pushing the Tealium team to say, what can we do with this thing? Because I think it has some legs. It's much more like CRM in some different respects, but at least creating those data layers within those segments to then create the profiling allows us to look at these people in very different ways, and then I can take that information, shoot it over to the CMS side of the house, or our cohorts for our marketing organization, I can shoot that over to them and give them a different perspective on the unengaged when they might actually be engaged, in fact.
Eric, what about your experience?
I would chime in that I don't feel focusing on use cases diminishes the vision of a broader solution.
Agreed.
Right? What it's allowed us to do is have wins and be able to demonstrate, look, this is a product that's adding near-term value. Honestly, that's also because by losing access to dev resources right at the start of my project, our deployment went slower than we would have liked. And so that left us needing to make a pivot to say, how can we show value quick, right? And it's not through tagging all of our other sites, it's working our way backwards up the funnel and saying, okay, what's that next audience that we can't reach right now that we could identify through Tealium? And it was some simple stuff, right? The equivalent of abandoned shopping cart pieces. Right? It's like, here are people who are coming to our site and are almost ready to apply for a job or tell us they want to hire, and they've walked away. How can we activate a Criteo campaign? How can we do we have their address? Can we activate a CRM campaign?
How important is setting up measurement when you actually go down this path of adopting Tealium to really figure out where you are in this journey? I know, Peter, you're just kind of getting into this process, so are you thinking about that as you're rolling Tealium out?
Yeah, it's at the top of our list. We got to prove out the ROI, right? Everyone says that all the time. But for us, it's really connecting the pipes and the plumbing. The last year, 2 years, we've actually been building out a data warehouse from scratch. Right, so that's a lot of our starting point has been just getting the basic company-wide reporting to make us better, right? And so now we can start to, within the data layer, start to understand, but we can connect multiple touch points and then start to create a profile of the users, and that's the direction we're moving in.
Awesome. So when you talked earlier, Doug, about just getting executive alignment at the start of it and early and onset in the conversations, how important to the executives is getting sort of visibility into some of the measurement that you are implementing with Tealium and making sure that there's sort of a connectivity back to the ROI of the solution?
Yeah, really important. In fact, actually, our chief consumer officer is saying, not surprising, we're very disparate. So I'm part of a marketing organization that doesn't necessarily always talk to one another. And so
Shocking.
Shocker. So a big part of that is she's really challenged myself to say, hey, how do you create the bones to connect these different environments together, to connect our campaigns together? I mentioned cohorts. So we have an engagement team that I said to them, I said, listen, what if we took your cohorts and just dropped them into the UDH? I said, even a small portion, just to start off with, just a little nibble to see whether or not we hypothesize. Again, are the unengaged really unengaged or not? Let's test that out a little bit. And so that's been my way of grassroots campaigning with some of these different folks, not to say I'll boil your whole goal, but let me just start embedding into your life a little bit. And so piece by piece doing that. In fact, actually I reached out to our security group and said, hey, we have 404 errors and 500 errors. What if we connected with you guys and we start doing some real-time streaming with some of that information as well? Bridging out beyond just the fact that it's the web and content and marketing, but beyond, into QA and security as well.
Yeah. Eric, any perspective on that?
Yeah. Well, I'll take to the theme of finding allies, right? So it's not just exec sponsors, there were teams that weren't particularly interested when we started, and we figured out ways to speak their language, right? So we have a digital transformation team that's very involved with our web product team in how do we deliver a really strong, self-identified, logged-in customer experience. Mm-hmm. And by being able to articulate to them, hey, what will help is, yes, we're building all of these point solutions to surface customer data, but everybody who hasn't identified themselves yet gets a vanilla treatment. What if we could segment them into audiences and give a much more personalized treatment when people show up? Mm-hmm. Based on our best guess of, are they hiring? Are they in market? Are they just looking for salary information? And so by being able to paint this as it's complementary to what you're doing, it's not a threat to the dev path you've taken, we got allies. Mm-hmm. And now we actually have people really interested in when can you help us build that?
Yeah. I think that you always get that perception that it is a threat as soon as you start to say, hey, I want to bring you into this conversation, right? I'm not trying to change the way you're doing things, but I'm just trying to get you to open up your eyes and maybe consider something a possibility, right? So I think that's always a really important point. How critical was that person, we were talking about it this morning, that individual who had the right charisma to step in and really help to facilitate the transformation? If that person wasn't in the organization, do you feel like the adoption of Tealium would have been successful? There would have been challenges there?
So the individual I was talking about this morning was much, or has been and is much more instrumental in overall technology transformation. Mm-hmm. I think we would have been successful. The method to the madness of focusing on ROI around performance mm-hmm. was we knew we could say that's in marketing's domain. Mm-hmm. We can demonstrate ROI, we're going to go make this purchase. So we were able to make a marketing-led decision to bring Tealium on board. Where this individual is going to be helpful, though, is in corralling organizational resources to make personalization a priority leveraging Tealium.
The change management.
Yeah, the change management would have been a lot tougher to do without this person who's a really strong change agent.
And Doug, you have a whole digital transformation organization, but the perception, or the reality of what they do and the reality of what you needed them to do is kind of different, right? What's been your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a process transformation office that's really focused on right now more communications and whatnot. And from my perspective, it's really kind of that 2.0 versioning that we're trying to get at, and getting them to buy in on the different changes that we're trying to make, the omni-channel personalization components. That's not really their role per se, mm-hmm. and that's kind of been an education back for us to say, okay, we need to switch gears, we need to find that change agent, mm-hmm. and who in the organization is willing to sign up and help.
Who's been the biggest barrier for blocking some of the progress that you've been trying to make? This is probably off script here, so.
Oh, you really want to dig deep. I mean, for me, the challenge, and I'm sure this is resident for a lot of folks, is IT. Whether it be I'm trying to explain to them what I'm trying to do, or the security parameters that we're trying to go through. I would say also that anticipating some of what they're going to ask is going to be tremendously helpful in this whole process as well. But there's just been barriers or things that I didn't expect them to come back with and say, oh, well, if you want to hit UDH, you got to give me static IP address, and I need this, this, and this in order to open up a porthole in the firewall, mm-hmm. which I'm still going through, by the way. But for me, that's been the biggest challenge at times, because within my team, I actually have resources that can do the tag management part. But at the same time, we still have to go through IT from their procedural process and everything else. And so that just puts the governator on, and it makes it really difficult.
Yeah. So potentially, if maybe the business and IT were owned by the same department, that process may have been a little different for you. But obviously, not all organizations are set up like that, so you always come across these different unique challenges. Peter, what about you? What are some of the barriers or challenges that you think, or who are some of the people that are potentially going to block or challenge this expansion?
I think it's similar to what you were saying, that it's really just the change. It's not so much an individual or in a department, but more the idea of we're going to change the way we're doing things. And for us, our sponsors were marketing and media. But now it's been transitioning into, we're having conversations with the product team, we're having conversations with the development team about how we can make their lives easier and how we can leverage these technologies into like a cohesive strategy. And that's where it's starting to get like really exciting, because it's like, oh, people are starting to pay attention.
You get a little bit of momentum now once you get their attention.
Yep.
Well, there's this element of governance, I feel like, at some point. When you get to a certain level of maturity, then you kind of have to have a cohesive committee or something along those lines that starts to understand the blocking and tackling that's going to formulate there as well.
Yeah, and we're in that process of figuring out, like, we're setting up the plumbing. And we want to figure out, okay, what are the levers we're going to pull? But then at some point, we want to hand it off to marketing and say, hey, you're going to pull these levers. Here you go. And then we kind of start, it's part of the governance development, right? Yep.
So I guess that's an interesting point that leads us to the next question, and I'll aim this for you, Eric. When you do adopt Tealium, do you find that you're changing sort of your organizational structure and how teams are set up? And then I guess the other part of this question is, what type of skill sets or capabilities of individuals do you look for to hire to actually potentially come in and utilize the tool?
So we did change our structure. We, as a marketing organization, we made a real pivot about 2.5 years ago to really focus on performance marketing. And I'd been leading another function that included analytics, and we broke analytics out as a separate team with a mandate to find new technology, help us drive optimization, help us drive self-service, audience creation, and data manipulation for other teams within the marketing department. And that led to us bringing in somebody who had previous Tealium experience as our product owner and as the people manager of what we call our implementation team, right? So Regan's out there. Regan's our director of analytics. Regan's team's broken up into an implementation group, a data warehouse group, and an analysis group. So we essentially built an implementation team, and that group had previously mostly been doing HTML tagging and GTM tagging, and gave them ownership of the product. After we stood that team up, one of the other challenges we realized is we had more work than we could handle. We weren't generating sufficient transparency to our institutional stakeholders, and people were grinding us. And so we moved to a full agile approach, right? So just stereotypical agile. However, I live in a world where my IT planning is incredibly static, right? So our dev life cycle is agile, agile, agile. Our IT prioritization is once a year, well in advance, argue for money.
Sounds like it's a common theme out there for other people too. Doug, I know that you're still early in getting everything up with AudienceStream. Is this something, as we have these workshops where we're bringing multiple teams together, have you had other conversations where people have thought maybe about having more cross-functional teams, representative from different departments come together in sort of a weekly or monthly knowledge sharing?
We're getting there. I mean, so I challenged the team, the Tealium team. I actually asked them to come in and do a Tealium day. We had several different parts of the organization come in and understand what Tealium was and is. I would say there was some interest that was generated towards more of like a committee type of entity there. I still think that we have a long way to go, because the implementation cycle for us is still very, structured and rigid. But I think once we get to a point where, again, people start seeing the data, then I think we'll be able to start having some different types of reactions that folks will have as well.
That vision that you were talking about and selling in finally becomes more tangible when you do have that data, when you can go and say, look at this report, we were able to do this, we finally have something to show, and I think that that's always a successful moment for customers. I think one of the things, Peter, going into the second half of this year, what are you really looking to accomplish with Tealium? What's sort of your goal, looking forward?
Yeah, I think we're excited to see some of these pilot programs and connectivity start to work and really start to prove out with, smaller audiences and smaller segments, but proving out like, hey, these pipes are working. and then starting to get a little excitement around it. And I think that's really going to start to accelerate in the second half of the year, where, you know, my anticipation is that the product team and the development teams are going to be excited about the things that we can help them with there. But I think more exciting is the marketing touch points and the ease at which we can execute.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be an eye-opener and a big transformation for us.
Are they patiently waiting for that, or are they kind of going off and looking at other options and trying to expedite the,
I think
the process?
that's an ongoing conversation for sure. But I think we're at that tipping point, which is what's exciting. We've done a lot of foundational work in the last year, and it's starting to come to fruition. So,
I mean, foundational work is so critical. I think everybody here talks about just making sure you have the right data foundation, and sometimes I think the thing that happens with marketing, and you guys can probably chime in on this, they want to just get close to the experiences and want to take the executional path, but without the right data, it's really hard to do that successfully. So getting them to take a step back is always really important. You know, Doug, what about you in the next 6 months? What's really the thing that you want to solve for?
One of them is that profiling scoring that I talked about. I think that's actually a game changer for us in many different ways. Anybody that can, you know, you can start to score cross-domain scoring, you know, put it on a scale of 100s. That way, we don't treat everybody the same way. So personalization starts to change. So maybe somebody that's an app user and this domain user and this domain user, we treat them a little differently than, say, the person that has not been there at all. You know, I think that's really important. Another one for me is page categorization. So I want to use Tealium in that way so we can start to bridge in voice of customer and start to show page categorization in relation to I mentioned the prospecting and things like that. I think that's also really important for us. And then ultimately, back to that profiling scoring, I use VOC information as well, but VOC to say, hey, this person's an NPS score of, say, a 7 or 8. How do I get them to a 9 or a 10? You know, so there's the personalization element that we're looking to. So for me, at the end of this year, I want to incrementally, again, small steps, but start to take some of those little baby steps and start to create some personalization so we can have Dante's Inferno of personalization. So we know, you know, before it's, hi Doug, now it's, hey, you've been here 4 times and you're a Go365 user, which is our wellness app, or wellness program. Well, now I'm going to give you a recipe as an example, you know.
I mean, how important is just using Tealium as the first step in building out sort of this scoring or modeling versus using some of the proprietary data sets that you have? Do you still feel like there's value of just starting within the Tealium platform and then getting to a point where you're bringing in your own models into the system?
Oh yeah, I mean, the cohorts, so the cohorts today live on, you know, somebody's PowerPoint deck, right? I want to operationalize those cohorts. That to me is where Tealium can come in and really play a strong role. Today, the way that the cohorts are defined is that it doesn't have all the definition around really digital activity or affinity. And so that really kind of changes the cohort model for me. So yeah, to me that's really critical.
Eric, what about you?
I feel like I'm going to give an infomercial. So the non-sexy part is to finish out the plumbing, right? To make sure that we've got IQ on all of our sites and AudienceStream where it makes sense. And the part that gets me excited is having a unified view of the customer. So making sure that I've got my CRM data, all of my performance channel data, and all of my stitched together online data in one set so that I can start making really smart decisions on how do we message to people. And again, it's marketing 101, right? It's the right message at the right time in the right channel, right? Whether that's performance, whether that's SMS, whether that's email, and really excited about that.
You're where I want to go.
Well, maybe next year you'll have to come and share where you're actually
Well, next year
at
I was
too.
a customer. I didn't own Tealium last year, so just think about it that way.
So that's a good transition. You know, there's a lot of people in the room today, some who have Tealium, you know, and have different levels of products that they've adopted, and some who are here trying to learn more about Tealium. So if you could think back to a year ago or a few years ago when you were thinking about taking this journey, you know, what's the piece of advice, and Eric, I'll start with you, what's the piece of advice or pieces of advice that you would leave for the audience?
So I would go with 2. One, you don't have to be linear in your dev path, right? Our original linear plan of do all of our IQ work, then do all of our AudienceStream work, then develop use cases, we flip that on its head. Let's get our most valuable property have really strong data layers, and be able to demonstrate ROI right away. The other lesson learned was to better speak in the vocabulary of benefits for my audience. So even though I would do that as a marketer with my customers, there were times where I was talking with our IT team, for example, where I defaulted to tech specs, and that didn't get anybody excited. Once we shifted to talking about what are you going to be able to do with this, what's the institutional problem this will solve, people's eyes opened.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar boat to what you just said, where it's what's the problem you're trying to solve for, and then tying it into the goal that they were trying to get to. I think some of it, a lot of times it's your priority is number one, their priority is, for you would be 6 or 7, right? And I think that's where it's getting that priority up to that 1 or 2 where they go, yeah, this makes sense for me. I think the other one for me would be, I think I made a broad assumption that I had a container tag out on the web and that I could just take the old TIQ and just take that out and put the new stuff in. In fact, actually for me it was a lot different than that. We had to go knock on every single door for IT and for all the project management to get in line or part of their plan. So that's why it's been a longer, extensive implementation for me, because a lot of that has to do with, literally setting up schedules for these folks for over 1,000 pages. Yeah. So I would say the more that you can understand the mechanisms, the things that you're going to have to do mechanically would really be important as well, as to kind of close that gap on the implementation.
And more on the sort of organizational structure there, that was more because of how IT was set up, right? Not necessarily because of you being a healthcare company and there being more hurdles to get there. It was more about...
No, it's just the way that we're structured. So it may not be unique to, or it is unique to me, it may not be unique to you, but something at least you should consider or think about.
Yeah, I think for us it was just how long some of these roadmaps actually are when you actually start to break it down. Like I'm trying to get from point A to point B, and how many steps there are and how many people you had to get involved. So you have buy-in from the executive team, but then you have a lot of work to do.
Right.
And it takes a lot longer than you originally thought. And I think to what you were saying about, start with the use case, I think in a lot of ways we could have used that advice, where maybe we did some kind of simple pilot earlier on to get more resources to execute.
Right. Well, I think you guys have shared a really great insight for the group here today. I think one of the things to take away is everybody's path and journey looks so different. I wish that we could say, here's a roadmap that we can give you, and if you do X, Y, Z things, you're going to have a full UDH rolled out and successfully adopted across the organization. But the reality is digital transformation is hard, and I think if we're realistic about it, and the more we can to really communicate often and across the organization, that really does help to facilitate a successful adoption of the platform. So thank you guys again so much for your time today, and I know there are several other sessions that talk about this same concept, so hopefully you guys will be able to attend. So thanks all.
Thanks for having us.